assuming, I hope that you've been able to follow along with Pope Francis during his visit to our country over these past few days, and he will again be with us for one more day tomorrow in Philadelphia. And so on our website is actually a place to follow along with all of the different speeches and so forth that he's giving. So if you'd like to check in there and see what it is that Pope Francis is saying, it's better always to hear it directly from Pope Francis as opposed to having other people tell us what our Holy Father's been saying to us. So just a time of great joy, I think, for all of us, for all Catholics, and for all people of goodwill. There seems to be a real excitement about his visit. So I think that if you've listened to anything that he's said, everyone, I should say, would probably, if we're listening to what the Pope is actually saying, we should be challenged by our Holy Father. That's the job of a pastor, is to both affirm and challenge at the same time, to both build us up and to also give us ways to improve. And so no matter who we are, no matter what we believe, if we're listening to the words of our Holy Father again, we should be challenged in some ways. Our Holy Father has noted many great things that Americans have been known for and continue to do throughout the world, and he has affirmed that and has lifted that up and has thanked us for that and has lifted up great examples of people both in the past and today who are doing that. So that he's affirming, but he also sees, I think, he does also see in our church, I think, in America, he sees, I think, a church that's different maybe than other parts of Europe, especially the First World. He sees a different feel in our country, even though we are wealthy, even though we are blessed with lots of material wealth. I think he sees that there's a different hope, a different light in our United States that is not there maybe so much anymore today, where the faith is starting to die in Western Europe. But again, one of the things that he's also been challenging us as well. And I think one of the themes, if you've been listening or being able to follow along, has to do with, it's mentioned actually today in the second reading from James. And basically James is saying, he's admonishing those who he wrote the letter to, and he said, you have withheld the wages of your laborers and have lived a life of luxury, is basically what he's saying. You have treated those who work, maybe even on the margins, the small people, the little people, you have treated them poorly and have lived a life of luxury at their expense. And so he's mentioned that. Pope Francis has mentioned that in talking about America in several different occasions over the past few days. And some people, it's interesting, following along, there are people who are basically like rending their garments, just tearing their garments over the Pope's comments in frustration. And, you'll hear even things like, from both Catholics and non-Catholics, critical things like, this Pope's a communist. Why doesn't he like capitalism? Doesn't he know the way that people get out of poverty is through jobs and all of these sorts of things? And just want to make a couple of points about that because again, it's out there a lot, and I think you've probably heard that as well. I think the first point that I'd just like to make with regards to, again, this reading and how we treat workers and so forth. The first point, everything that Pope Francis has said is exactly the same thing that the Church has been saying, that Pope John Paul II has been saying, that Pope Benedict XVI was saying when he was the Holy Father. It goes back a long way. This is not new. Catholic social teaching rose up out of the Industrial Revolution and basically led the world in terms of helping us figure out, now that we have all this technology, how do we use it? How do we treat people fairly? How do we treat workers as if they're not a part of a machine? And so what Pope Francis is saying in offering this critique is not new. It's been around for a long time. And again, there are a lot of quotes out there. I can provide them for you if you would like, but he's not the first Pope to say these sorts of things and to challenge us in this way. I think it's also a second comment. Communism, which the Church condemns outright, right? Communism, the Church condemns that outright. But we also have to acknowledge and admit that it didn't rise up out of nowhere. This idea that, we should just, pass all of our goods to the government and let the government just basically redistribute it to everyone, which is kind of basically the point of communism. that didn't come up out of nowhere. It wasn't like somebody thought around and was like, how should we be evil? Let's be communist. It came up out of workers being mistreated on a large scale. Now, that doesn't make it right, but we should at least acknowledge that it didn't just, one person didn't decide to do it. It came up out of real situations. And some of those real situations are present even in South America, where our Holy Father is from. But again, the critiques that he's been saying are not new to him. The third, which I already just kind of mentioned, is that the church says that communism is evil and always will be. It's founded, one of the other founding principles is that atheism, all organized religion should be gotten rid of and is not allowed to be practiced. So why would the church condone, or why would the church approve communism, right? Okay, we're an organized religion. Communism says we should get rid of organized religion. We support that? That wouldn't make any sense, right? The church has always condemned that. The fourth point that we should probably be making is that there are not just three options. And this is another thing, Okay, so obviously the church is against communism and just treating everybody the same and passing all of our goods to the government. And so the other things then, it's often portrayed kind of cartoonish, as if on the other side is capitalism, and then in the middle is this socialism that's 50-50. It's a little bit of both. Sometimes we pass stuff out to everybody, but we also can have money for ourselves, right? So it's like these three things, and that's not, it's not that there are just three options, right? There are myriad ways in which we can live out capitalism or socialism. There's a lot of ways in which we can live out, a lot of different ways. No country in the world has the exact same laws governing their economy, laws governing even if they are capitalistic in nature, there's still lots of variations within that. So the Pope is not saying get rid of capitalism. He's saying you can have capitalism look a lot of different ways. And so what the Pope is encouraging us is to make sure that it looks like a just system, that it's informed by the Scriptures, and informed by treating people fairly. A fifth point, no economic system will save us. No matter what system we have, no matter what system of economy we choose, no matter how we tweak the system, about whatever laws we have that govern our economic system, none of them will save us. We will always have to be vigilant. We will always have to be monitoring them and making sure that it is just, and that if we have to be asking ourselves, can this current system that we have, can it be more just? And that's what the Holy Father is asking us. It's not like, he's talking negatively about capitalism, so he's really a closet communist. That's not it. The Holy Father has seen communism, and he is, like anyone who's ever experienced it, and the Church is obviously very much opposed to it. So we have to kind of calm everything down, right, first of all. And we just have to really kind of listen to what the Holy Father is saying. So let's look at the reading then from James today. There are two types of sin according to the church, right? Mortal and venial. Mortal sin is any kind of sin, and that comes from 1 John. John says in that letter there are two types of sin, deadly and not deadly sin. So we have mortal and venial, not deadly, but still obviously no sin is good. Mortal sin is any kind of sin where I make a definitive break and turn from God. So God doesn't stop loving me when I commit a mortal sin. It's me making a definitive decision to turn my back and leave God in a very serious and grave way, knowingly doing that. That's mortal. Okay? So, but within mortal sin, there are 4 sins that the church says are especially serious. They are called sins that cry out to God for vengeance. The church has taught this from the beginning. It's present in Scripture as well. There are 4 sins that cry out to heaven for vengeance. So when the church says there are a special type of mortal sin, which is already deadly, that is even worse, we should really pay attention. And one of the sins that cries out to heaven for vengeance is not treating workers fairly, not treating laborers fairly. And it comes precisely from this second reading, where it says, the sins, the cries of these workers cry out to God, and he hears them. So this is not like some sort of, high school economics class, like, well, we should tweak this, or very theoretical. No, this has great spiritual implication, which is why our Holy Father is talking about it. He's asking us to consider it and to look at it and to focus on it because it's an important thing for us to be praying about and reflecting on. Now, there's also, though, again, the church has lots of positive things to say. The Second Vatican Council had a lot of great things to say about how we treat workers and how we order our economy and our lives. The Second Vatican Council said paying a person for their work should guarantee the opportunity to provide a dignified livelihood for himself and his family on the material, social, cultural, and spiritual level. A person that is working deserves, through that work, to be able to support their family. And if there is some system set up where a person is working but is not getting enough to support their family on a basic level, that's wrong. And that's on all of us, because we're all part of the system. And so we need to be thinking about that. Pope Francis isn't saying you're all evil and you're all going to hell. He's saying think about this question and what role we play. The Second Vatican Council also says every person has the right to possess a sufficient amount of the earth's goods for himself and his family. We are supposed to, as the wealthy, as those who are blessed, we are to help the poor not merely out of our surplus, the Second Vatican Council says. So we don't just sit around and say, okay, well, I'm going to do whatever I want. I'm going to consume as much as I want, and I'm going to take out all this stuff in, and then whatever I have left over, I'll go and throw that or give that to the poor. That's not what the church is calling us to. And so, again, some people hear this. They hear what the church is proposing. They hear Pope Francis. They hear the Second Vatican Council. They hear John Paul II, Benedict XVI, Paul VI, John the 23rd, etc. And they say that sounds like redistribution of wealth. And that's false. That's not true at all. What the church is proposing is not redistributing wealth. The church says, in fact, that welfare should be used only sparingly and in emergencies. That's also a part of the church teaching we don't hear a lot about. Another objection, the church is putting down business owners, people who are out creating jobs, and that is completely false too. The church always talks about the importance of jobs. When we're talking about jobs, and earlier there about what a person deserves, a person can't even be working in the first place if there is no job to have. So the idea that the church somehow puts that down is not true at all. People who are working in business and who are starting their own companies and are doing this work, it's a good thing, it's a great thing, because it allows exactly what the church is saying. It allows people to have a job. And so the church isn't putting that down. So what I invite us to do, just very briefly, or throughout this visit of Pope Francis, and hopefully forever, is let's take off our Democratic hat for a second. Or if we're a Republican, let's take off our Republican hat, whatever hat you wear. Or if you're a part of the Green Party or whatever other party there is, take that hat off for just a minute and listen to what the church is actually saying. What Jesus is actually saying. What Pope Francis is actually saying. What James in the second reading today is actually saying. Not what spin doctors are saying they're saying. Not what we can't hear it through the lens of politics. We have to listen to the truth of what's being said. And we have to say and ask ourselves a serious question. How does this teaching in here, how does it challenge me to grow? If we're really open and honest, we're going to be asking that question. Not what parts did Pope Francis get right, what parts did Jesus get right, and what did he get wrong? What does he need to tweak in order to fit into my political view of things? We need to ask honestly, what parts of these teachings challenge me? And in what areas do I need to grow in this regard? If we're still listening at this point to me, or James, or the church, or Jesus, or the scriptures, or the popes, or the Second Vatican Council, I think questions come up. What are we supposed to do? That might be all well and good, and Pope Francis' challenges and his words, and Jesus and James, all of these things about treating workers fairly, that's all great. What do we do about it? What are we supposed to do? First of all, we have to acknowledge I can't go out and pay the migrant worker who's picking the strawberries. I can't pay him more today. I cannot work. I cannot go out and directly do that. I don't have that ability. So I should first do what Pope Francis said last night in his homily. Start with yourself. Start with yourself. And there's a lot, if you're like me, there's a lot to work on. And a question then that I ask as I turn inward and I start with myself, I can ask myself, am I striving for simplicity of life? Am I striving for simplicity of life? G.K. Chesterton once said, if you make a person happier, it doesn't matter if you make him or her poorer. If we live more simply, but we become happier, we won't care about the ways in which we've become simpler. We'll simply be happier. And that's what Jesus is inviting us to trust. If you become simpler, you will become happier. And as Jesus says in the gospel, if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. If the things and the attachments that we have in our life, if they cause us to sin, if they cause us to treat people or become a part of a system that treats people unfairly, get rid of it. Get rid of the habit. Get rid of the addiction. Get rid of the whatever it is, the attachment, the consumerism, the materialism in your heart. Get rid of it. Jesus says it's better to enter into heaven without that than it is to take that attitude, that spirit, into the fires of hell. Another question then, I think, that as we start to turn inward, but then we start to move outward as well, a question, can I do more locally? Can I do more locally? The church asks us to start at the levels in which we can affect change. And so I start with myself, and then I look small, and I look local. I have to ask myself things like, is buying something at the lowest price always the best decision? Is that always the best? Some people, that question can't be asked. They're living in poverty. But for us, most of us, we're blessed to be able to step back and ask that question. Should I buy as much as I can of the thing at the lowest price, or is there maybe less of something at a higher price, but because it's treating the workers in a different way? Or it is allowing a system to unfold that has a more just treatment of people in mind. Just because the sticker price of something is lower, does that mean it's right? That's kind of the local thing. Can I affirm the dignity of the worker by actually buying something locally off of a person? Those types of questions. How can I work for reform and make sure that the people in our community, first and foremost, before I worry about economic policies of the United States, what can I do here in Brazil? What can I do in Clay County? What can I do in home? After starting with all of that, I then also can look at the larger system that I'm a part of as a nation. And we can ask questions of our elected representatives and so forth. Is greed the right thing to base our economy on? If we base our economy on greed, will that ensure that what happens is just and will turn out okay? Is the way that we fix our local economy or our larger economy, is that by buying things, buying more things? Our president told us that when we first began, not our current president, but when we first began our economic downturn many years ago, I think it was in 2008, came out and said, if you want to fix the economy, if you want to make things work again, go buy more stuff. Is that really the way that we fix our economy and ensure that people are treated fairly? Does our economy and the economic laws and things that govern these things, does it reference the truth of Christ? Does it reference the good? Does it protect the dignity of people? Does it just and so on and so forth? What is it built on? If it's built on the wrong principles, the church says it will fail. And we can always be tweaking it, always improving it, and that's what Pope Francis is inviting us to do. The church is inviting us to do. We hear again, behold, the wages you withheld from the workers who harvested your fields are crying aloud, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. Translation, it is a sin that cries out to God. May we work continuously to see that our economy is as just as it possibly can be, and that all are able to receive that which justice demands, the ability to take care of themselves and their family at a basic level. May this continual spirit of improvement that our Holy Father is calling us to, may it be done out of love for our neighbor, and may it start with me.